Let's make a start, and let me introduce our first speaker. Slight change to the programme, and he'll tell you about this, but Cllr Steven Broadbent, Cabinet Member for Transport at Buckinghamshire, is going to now update you on progress to date and set the scene before our ministerial address. So, welcome, Steve. Steve, the floor is yours. Applause. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anthony. Good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself, because the observant amongst you will have noticed that I'm not Councillor Martin Tett, the leader of Buckinghamshire Council, and until recently, he was the chair of England's Economic Heartland Leaders Group. Unfortunately, Martin is unable to be here today due to difficult circumstances for him and his family. So I'm taking his place as Cabinet Member for Transport at Buckinghamshire Council, but I've also been a member of EEH's Strategic Transport Forum for some time, and I'm also proud to chair the East-West Mainline Partnership, which recently replaced the East-West Rail Consortium. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome you here to Silverstone Circuit today, the UK's global centre for motorsport and a core economic asset for ourselves in Buckinghamshire. Although I realise my good friends in Northamptonshire may have a good reason to claim Silverstone as part of their county too. So let's be diplomatic. What really matters is that Silverstone is one of the gems in the Heartland's crown, and the high-performance engineering cluster that's located around this world-famous racetrack is a demonstration of why the Heartland is an economic powerhouse. Our region's success is founded on science and technology innovation, powered by a network of world-leading universities and research centres. And our potential is immense. But we have known for some time that this potential is being constrained by infrastructure, which frankly is not up to the job. It was for this reason why in 2015 Martin Tett met with the then leader of Oxfordshire County Council and the then leader of Northamptonshire County Council at, I am told, a rather drab motorway service station on the M40. They were there to discuss opportunities to deliver regional leadership, the leadership required to deliver transformational infrastructure in order to realise the potential of our region. Supporting economic growth and enabling major housing growth in our local plans. They were humble beginnings, but look at what England's economic heartland has become. EEH's geography now reaches from Swindon in the west to Cambridgeshire in the east, and from Northamptonshire down to Hertfordshire. EEH is the region's sub-national transport body, part funded by the DfT, but enabling it to advise government on the Heartland's infrastructure priorities, which will deliver for both the region and the country. By working collaboratively on issues of strategic importance, we are better able to plan for infrastructure solutions that extend beyond a single area. And the case for investment in strategic infrastructure is strengthened by having a single voice at scale that has influence and impact. In some ways, 2015 could feel like another age, particularly given what we faced in the last 2 years. Of those three original leaders, only Martin remains in post, and both Buckinghamshire County Council and Northamptonshire County Council have been replaced by unitaries authorities. And yes, EEH predates the Oxford-Cambridge arc. But in other ways, the passage of time has not changed the fundamental reason as to why England's economic heartland remains as important now as it was when those three leaders originally chose to work together on issues of genuine strategic significance. If we continue to get it right, collectively we can break down barriers, make real progress in tackling the challenges we face, and importantly, see things being delivered on the ground. I am delighted that the Minister for Roads, Local Transport and Devolution, Baroness Vere, will be joining us by video link to address the conference shortly. Her presence here today reinforces the strategic commitment that the government places on sub-national transport bodies and the work that's being done. But before I welcome Baroness Vere, I'd like to finish with the following. The Heartland is a region of international significance. It is key to the UK's ability to compete on a global stage, a net contributor to the Treasury, and it's us who will provide the government with the tax receipts to fund its levelling up agenda. In a week's time, we will be watching the Chancellor deliver his spending review commitments. An investment in our infrastructure from East West Rail, including the Aylesbury to Milton Keynes link, through our major road network is urgently required. Not to support future growth, but simply to enable the growth that's already set out in our local plans. England's economic heartland is turning words into actions, and I sincerely hope the Chancellor takes the opportunity to do the same by demonstrating the government's commitment to a region that can deliver so much more for the UK. So I'd now like to welcome Baroness Vere to the conference, and thank you for listening.
Welcome. Baroness Vere of Norbiton, appointed Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for the Department of Transport in 2019. You're responsible for roads, buses and taxis, light rail, and devolution. And I think it's really appropriate that you set the scene in terms of the government support for this region. We're going to put some questions to you a bit later on, Baroness. I hope you're going to take some questions later on, a few interesting questions. So the floor is yours now. Baroness.
Thanks very much, Stephen. It's my pleasure to be here today. I'm joining you via a very dodgy internet link, which is extremely disappointing. I would have liked to have been there in person, but unfortunately, my diary just was a little busy this morning, so I couldn't come up to Silverstone. Big disappointment. Anyway, so I'd just like to make a few remarks, and then hopefully we can get to some questions. And great to see all of you in the room. I see someone's just turned the camera around, which is fantastic. Because it's been an entire year since I last spoke to you, and my goodness, what an enormous change we've had in that last year. If you think about where we were in September 2020, we didn't even have a vaccine. None of us had jabs in our arms at that stage. We weren't entirely sure how we were going to get out of the pandemic. And of course, life has now changed significantly, and the economy is back on its feet. Our UK growth is forecasted to be the highest of any G7. And so long may that continue. So now that restrictions have been lifted, it is fantastic that we can get back to as much normality as we possibly can. And I think it's in part due to everybody who's worked in transport over the last sort of 20 months or so, deserves a huge amount of credit for keeping the country moving, not only just getting passengers around, but also keeping the goods moving as well. So transport has played a key role in everything that's gone before. And of course, it's going to play an absolutely key role in the future, because increased connectivity is absolutely essential for jobs, to attract investment, in general, just to increase the economic opportunity across the country. And Stephen, I thought, was making some really important points about the contribution of EEH to our country's prosperity. And it's not only just about connectivity in certain areas, it's also about levelling up. And I know that that's a phrase that's bandied around, but every single region of this country has areas which are doing worse than they should be. And we need to identify those and make sure that we level them up. And of course, within all of that, we are going to be thinking about how we deal with greenhouse gases and emissions. So as we look to enhance and to transform our infrastructure and our services, we must also think very carefully about decarbonisation and emissions and how that can be at the heart of what we do. We've got to think about more journeys by bus, we've got to think about more journeys on a bicycle or walking. And of course, the latter two in particular are particularly good for the nation's health as well. So it is about decarbonisation, but also about more healthy living. And so, and one of the first questions actually that I was ever asked when I came into my job a couple of years ago now was, why do we need these STVs? And so I looked into it, and actually I concluded, my word, we do. Because I think the STVs do an outstanding job of bringing together often very different voices from within a region to try and work out what the overarching infrastructure ambition should be for an area, and also bringing together people to improve services. because you know more than I do, more than anyone in Whitehall does, about what is important for your region and how government can help you to bring your transport networks forward. So that's why the government needs, or the country needs, STBs such as EEH. And it's been my pleasure to work alongside the STBs over recent months and years. So it's really also, I'd like to sort of recognise the contribution, obviously, of Councillor Martin Tett, who I'm very sad is not with us today, and I hope to be able to see him soon. And of course to Mayor Dave Hodgson, who's chair of the Strategic Transport Forum, and both of them have made excellent contributions in terms of leadership. And we've got a new chair, Councillor Richard Wenham, I understand, who I know can't be with us today, and I'm not sure I've met him, but no doubt I will be meeting him soon to understand a little bit more about EEH's plans. So as Stephen was pointing out, EEH, the area, is a net contributor to the Exchequer, which always goes down very, very well with the Treasury. Huge amount of high quality jobs in the universities, the research institutions, and the science parks, covering a huge range of different sectors. And it's really, really important for our global competitiveness. And so what we've got to also think about in terms of our economic competitiveness is how do we decarbonise alongside that. But we can't sort of revert to a very old style, top-down, central government-led decarbonisation planning. It's got to be driven from local transport plans, from local areas, and then upwards, because each local area will be able to do different things, have different ambitions, different types of transport, depending on their local community's needs. So I think that is going to be really key. And of course, funding will be linked to the level of ambition in local transport plans and indeed other documents that we're going to be getting from local authorities fairly soon. One of which is, of course, the bus service improvement plan as part of the National Bus Strategy. So that's how we can transform and reinvigorate bus services outside London, make sure that more people choose the bus over the car, to kind of get some decongestion in our town centres, make them slightly better places for people to shop and hang out and do all of the things that town centres are really, really good for. Now, I have got several more pages of speech, but actually I'm very keen to really hear from you and your questions. It is really important that I do hear what your priorities are at the moment. I was listening to Stephen earlier about things that he said. Obviously, there is the focus on the Oxcam arc as well as EEH, and I am clear that those two things go hand in hand, but also must be considered separately too. So I will finish there because I'm very, very keen to hear from you and certainly happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to kick off some questions, but if you have got questions, put your hand up now and I will come over to you with a microphone. Well, Andrew will come over with a microphone. While we're doing that, I said earlier, Minister, that the plans that England's Economic Heartland have got about delivering a world-class heartland, it's all about people. All about people. So from that perspective, I suppose when you look at the businesses and the residents of the region, when will they know, how do they measure what good is? How will they know that this region is succeeding? What are your measures for success from the DFT's perspective?
Well, I think one of my measures of success is certainly when I get no requests for meetings because everybody's happy. Because no one ever wants to speak to the minister when people are happy. So but from a local residents and a local businesses perspective, what my ambition is for transport to be purely an enabler and not a source of friction. So, whenever there is congestion, particularly, for example, on the strategic road network, and you can't get people around, you can't get goods around, people are delayed, that costs the economy. Those are the sorts of things where if we can just ease the transport system so that it is the ultimate enabler and not a pain in the arse, then that is a very, very good thing. So, for example, the investment on the A428 at Taxton Gibbet, that will be a key one of those sorts of decongesting activities that we can do. But of course, I've just mentioned roads, and the same goes for all of the different modes of transport. How do we make sure that when someone leaves their house in the morning, they don't have to make difficult choices by taking the least worst option when it comes to transport, but they should be able to make a positive choice And hopefully they will also think about their carbon footprint and whether or not they could do with, walking a mile or two that morning. And these are all considerations I think that people should be able to take. But to do so, they need the services that are available and that are high quality on their doorstep.
And is that a different measure? I mean, there are rural communities in this region, there are urban communities. I mean, how do you balance the needs of those different communities? Because they are different.
Yeah, and it's terribly difficult. And of course, that's why we need to work very closely with local authorities and subnational transport bodies, because they know more than I do.
Okay. So
I know that across the country, I've got urban communities and rural communities, and we will invest, for example, in demand responsive transport, £20 million, but we have to let local people deliver the services that that funding funds, because I cannot do it from Whitehall. It's impossible.
So give us some specifics. They're all in the room today. What can they do for you to help accelerate this and help accelerate economic recovery across the region?
Well, I think they probably have quite enough from government about what they can do for us, because we have been quite demanding on our timelines, for example, on the bus service improvement plan, on our requirement now that we're going to put extra oomph behind the local transport plan. So I think overall, it should be, if I was a local authority leader, it's very much about focusing on capability and capacity within your transport resources, so that we can try and link together all of these funds. Because of course, the way that government is structured, as you know, it's quite modally based, although I cover devolution, so I do get to see across the modes. But actually linking up the modes is often something that must be done locally, because each mode will have different interactions within the local communities. So I think, from a local authority perspective, a greater focus on integration, capability and capacity to build the transport skills that we're going to need to make sure that the funding that comes from central government is used most effectively locally.
Okay, and I can't miss the opportunity to ask you about the decarbonisation plans that were published over the last 24 hours. I mean, how can local authorities, how can EEH help you to deliver that ambitious net zero plan?
Well, of course, that was the government-wide decarbonisation plans, and the Transport Department has already, many weeks ago now, published its decarbonisation plan. And in it did set out exactly how we want to work with local authorities, very much bottom-up ideas for decarbonisation. What works in one area won't necessarily work in another area, but there is an enormous amount of support. And once we are past spending review and there's greater clarity on what the financial settlements looks like, we'll be able to really sit down and think about the best way to get the best bang from our buck for decarbonisation. But alongside that, it mustn't just be about decarbonisation. Let's improve services too. Okay.
Question for the floor. Just say who you are and fire away.
Minister, my name is Jerry Sansom. I represent CPRE Bedfordshire, the countryside charity. It's now agreed, not least by the UN, that the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries on the planet. What hope then, when a minister agrees to build a new road, the A6 M1 Link Road in Bedfordshire, contrary to the advice of the government's environment advisors, Natural England, a road which will slice through the Bedfordshire-Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty and impact to ancient woodlands planted before 1600. All this countryside havens for biodiversity. A case, we say, of environmental vandalism.
So are roads a 20th century solution, Minister? I mean, is that not just adding to the decarbonisation problem?
And so, my question, please.
We'll get to the question.
My question, so this is what you agreed, Minister, a few days ago. So what hope, Minister? Why did you agree to such destruction? Thank you.
Oh, yeah, I absolutely did agree with that. I think I did agree with that, and I think it's a really good project, actually, a very, very good project, much needed for the local area. Because whenever we consider projects, whether they be the largest projects, on the SRN, for example, the A14 upgrade, or whether they be more local interventions, You have to have a balance, of course you do, and an enormous amount of work goes into minimising environmental impacts. You would have seen, obviously, in the Environment Bill, the commitments to biodiversity net gain that have come in. Obviously, an enormous amount of work goes into the amount of carbon emissions, and National Highways, for example, has a net zero plan that it has committed itself to. What we are not going to do is basically put this country in aspic. It's just not going to happen. But what we can do is we can have good and sensitive development to take into account the shifting economic needs that will inevitably happen over the coming years and decades ahead. So we do have to have an eye to the future. We have to have an eye, of course, to our carbon emissions and indeed other emissions around air quality and also biodiversity. And that is what our planning permission system is set up to do.
Okay, question from the floor over here. Far away.
Thanks, Steve. Morning, Minister. I'm Councillor David Reynard, leader of Swindon Council. I wanted to ask a question about the government's aim in terms of improving east-west connectivity. I wonder if you could comment on how important you see the road and rail links between Swindon and Oxfordshire in terms of delivering on that aim.
Yeah, no, it's really important, and quite often, actually, this is the sorts of area where we really need some cohesive thinking from the subnational transport body, working both with Network Rail, with the government, with the department, and also with National Highways, to think about those links that do go east-west. I mean, it used to be very much, you're either going into London or you're not. And now we really do need to think about the links. And of course, we are looking at that with East West Rail. There's a variety of road projects which we're looking at. As you know, we decided that the Oxcam Expressway would be we decided it would be too environmentally damaging. And therefore we did not go ahead with that. But we do think that there are other which are more which can be mitigated better in terms of the environment. And so we are looking at that at the moment. So the road enhancement programme, which starts in 2025, I know it seems like a long time away, but that's road investment for you. We need to really plan and programme our investments really carefully. So feeding into work around RIS3, which is there's an online tool that National Highways has like that. But of course,
Minister, the internet connection has gone very unstable, so probably it's telling us something. We've got time for one final question, just from the floor there, far away, just very, very quick question, and then I think the internet is telling us that it's time to wrap up. Far away.
Alan Francis from Milton Keynes Green Party. I, like many others in the room, have been campaigning for East West Rail for many decades now, and it's very welcome that it's under construction, the first part of it. Your transport decarbonisation plan obviously talks about electrifying more railways. So why is East West Rail not being electrified from day one? It was going to be, and then your department cancelled it a couple of years ago.
Simple question, which has got a lot of support for the room, Minister.
Yes, I mean, there's always questions of cost, there's questions of deliverability, there's questions of timelines. So, in all of these things, we do try and make sure that we minimise carbon emissions as much as possible. And sometimes there are other considerations which mean that an electrification decision isn't possible at that stage. But it is the case that we have electrified far more miles of railway lines than any previous government, and we continue to have a very ambitious electrification programme. Apologies for my internet. It has been a pleasure to join you. Next year, I promise I'll be there in person.
Minister, I know you've got to get off to a meeting at the House, so thank you very much for joining us today. It's great to see that the government is supporting this region and certainly its ambitions, so your presence here certainly underlines that. So thanks for answering the questions, and we look forward to catching up very soon. Thanks. Round of applause to the Minister. Thanks.
Thank you.